Thank you.
Hello. Whoa. Can everybody hear me?
Da-da-da-da.
Yeah. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah, okay. Wow, this is such a pleasure to be here with you. I just want to thank DC Public Libraries for making this happen. I feel like it's such a dream to be able to talk to you.
What?
No, and I want to give a little, before we get into it, we're going to have a chat, and then you guys are going to have time to ask questions. I know that people are eager to ask you questions. I have a lot of questions that I want to ask and I want to talk to you about.
Let's do it.
But before we get into it, I want to give a little testimony to your work, right? When I first read Juliet Takes a Breath, I had just had my first panic attack ever. Like, I was like in a dark place. I was like, there's no way I can see myself getting out of this.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, I had racing thoughts, everything, right? So I was sitting there and I was like, I can't focus on anything. And I just started reading. And I was like, okay, just read word for word. And somehow, not to be cliche, I took a breath. I took a breath long enough until I felt like I was able to breathe and ask for help. So thank you for that. Thank you so much for that. And I'm sure you've had a lot of people say that your work has impacted them. So I just want to start with Juliet and tell us about her journey and her journey into creation and how you came about writing your story.
Aw, listen, thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that. It's not easy to like admit those things, right? That we
Yeah.
like have panic attacks or anxiety and like, you know, high stress and all of these things, right? And so that's very real, that's very valid. And like, Juliet Takes a Breath is my first novel, LGBTQIA. I'm originally from the Bronx, Puerto Rican from the Bronx, New York. And growing up in like the 80s and 90s, there wasn't a lot of like queer representation or LGBTQ representation. And what I did see made me sad, right? Like, well, I lost a generation of elders to the HIV/AIDS disaster crisis. And I saw my country and a lot of mainstream folks being like, that's good for you. That's
Yeah.
what you get for being in that lifestyle, for being like that. And so a lot of the media I grew up watching and witnessing meant that like if I was gonna be gay or lesbian, I wasn't gonna have a good life. And so I remember being in my like 20s and like being a poet, being a writer, and being like, why is it always gotta be like that? Why can't we
Yeah.
live to the end of the story?
Right.
Why can't like our families love us? Like that has to be possible, right? Because if I exist, then there are others. And so I just started writing Juliet's story, which is also partly my story of coming into queerness and feminism and race and like the history of being a diasporican, right? Like, what did it mean for my grandparents to leave Puerto Rico, come to the United States? Even the term leaving is like, did you leave or did you get pushed out, you know?
Right.
And so it's just this intersection of all of these things in my life that I just wanted to like have fun and write down. And I wanted it to be like, I wanted Juliet to be like this chubby, joyful, round the way girl, right? Because I don't know if any of you are from the inner cities, but there's so many like thick, beautiful women that love themselves, right? That we
Yeah.
love ourselves and there's this desire and beauty and like energy, and I wanted that for Juliet. I wanted her to live to the end of the story. I wanted her to love herself, to be loved, and to explore her identities as a young Puerto Rican queer girl.
And is it right to say that so much of like her journey is through to self-discovery, right?
Yes.
And did you always intend this like coming of age, self-discovery, like this is the story I want to tell?
You know, it evolved, right? Because when I first wrote Juliet, it was more like a party book where I was like, she's just having fun. She's
Yeah.
just living life. And then I was like, wait a second. If this is the only thing I ever offer, and I don't know any like queer Puerto Ricans writing books, right? This was in the beginning of my journey to myself. Then I better put out something that is like layered with love and like humanity and like critique of whiteness, white supremacy, that offers a different perspective on Latino families, right? Because we're considered more homophobic than
Right.
other families, right?
Right.
So what does it look like to have a mom that maybe has misgivings and is worried about you but doesn't completely put you out? What does
Right.
it look like to have the mother go through her own journey? What does it look like to write a book that is about a young woman but also depicts young Latino men and has a brother that is soft and nerdy and into sci-fi, right? What does it look like to have a book where a girl is really struggling and trying to understand what it means to be a woman, what it means to be all of these things, you
Right.
know? You gotta layer in. I felt like if this was my offering to the people, to my people, then I wanted it to be really thoughtful.
Yeah, and who would you say early on, if there was anyone that encouraged you in your storytelling and in your writing, and to keep pursuing like
Yeah.
storytelling, which is something that takes courage.
Yeah, I mean, my mom was a teacher. My mom was a New York City public school teacher, kindergarten teacher for like 30 something years. And so she always encouraged me to like write and read books. We were always in the libraries. My mom loved curating the library in her classroom. So definitely my mom all the way. And then I always was able to like tap into community. So in New York, I found the New York City Latina Writers Group in the early 2000s. And it was just a bunch of like Caribbean, Afro-Latina, like Puerto Rican, Dominican, Latinas from all over writing together, supporting each other. And so they were always encouraging me and each other. Some of them would like read my work for free and like
Yeah.
offer critique. They would do
Wow.
workshops. And at the time, I like barely had $1, you know? So I couldn't afford to pay any of those fees. And they'd be like, just come.
Right.
Just come. You do not have to do that here. You can just come and be, you know? And so definitely like women of color, like queer people encouraged me,
Oof.
you know?
I mean,
Yeah.
and I feel like part of your work really centers community and like the need for community, right?
Yeah.
So would you say that that comes from a lot of your lived experiences?
Yeah, I mean, listen, my parents were like evangelical Christian Puerto Ricans, right? But they are from the Bronx and lived in New York and were like, you should love everyone as your neighbor. We had Hindu neighbors, Jewish neighbors, Italian, Catholic, like Korean, Buddhist. I'm telling you, my neighborhood had everybody. And my parents were like, you love your neighbor, you respect the neighbor, you treat them with kindness.
Yeah.
If someone comes for this neighbor, we're all stepping up. We're all
Right.
protecting. And so I've just always had that mentality, you know,
Right.
and there's a part of me that wishes there was more of it, right? Like
Yeah.
I wonder where, I lean into that. Into that. I don't care.
Right.
First and foremost, that's just what I have inside of me.
Well, and I think about growing up in the 90s, we were like neighbors,
Right.
We were next, you went to the next door neighbor for something, something was happening, you talked to your neighbor, and now
Right.
it's changed a lot.
Yeah, and community is I mean, I think about I'm from the Bronx. I'm from New York. My roots are in Puerto Rico, though, right? And so I think about after Hurricane Maria. I think about I was in there in 2019, right before the pandemic, and there were all these hurricanes, and who is helping each other but the people, right? It's mutual aid.
Yeah.
It's the LGBTQ center in PR called El Hangar, and everyone there, they're the ones, the queers, the drag queens, the transgender folks are the ones rallying to get water and supplies and electricity to all the abuelitas, right? And then the abuelitas are the ones that are scooping out the plates of food and feeding everyone who's doing the deliveries. Is it FEMA? No. Is it the government?
Yeah.
No. It is the people. And so to me, I've seen that even in my neighborhood, you know what I mean? Even in my mother, when she was a teacher and they weren't giving her the benefits that she deserved, she was part of a union.
Right.
A union is a community. And so my first protests were for unionizing with my mom and the Teachers Federation, right?
Yeah.
And so that has just always been what I have seen, that we protect each other.
Right.
We are the ones that rally for each other, you know? They might try to divide us, but deep down inside, it's people showing up for people. So
Yeah.
that's why community is so important to me.
And I love how you bring that into one of your characters. We could talk about Marvel, America. America Chavez, her whole being and the way she is in the world is formed by her community.
Yeah.
Could you talk to us a little bit about America Chavez and her creation and your journey into writing for Marvel, which
Oh
is
my gosh.
amazing?
Thank you. Yeah, listen, I grew up in a household where my family loved sci-fi stuff. They're like, oh, you know, like I said, old Puerto Ricans from the 50s. So they watched Star Trek.
Yeah.
They like collected like, what is it, the Fantastic Four comics and the Torch and all these things. You know, my parents are like huge nerds. And so I was against all of that growing up. I was like, I am not interested in that. I don't want to be like them. And somehow my life has cycled where it's like, no, you're a nerd too.
Yeah.
And so Marvel came along and they had read Juliet Takes a Breath. So I'm like minding my business,
Yeah.
writing my stuff at my like day job. The people at Marvel had this character, America Chavez, and she was in their universe, and they wanted to develop a solo series for her. So in them doing that research and being like, hey, we have a character who's already Latina, who's already queer, instead of getting like Tom and Nick to write her story, who have written all the stories, let's go outside into the world and like read new work, find new voices, read women, read POC authors. That's how they found Juliet Takes a Breath. And so then they tapped me and were like, hey, do you want to write for us? And I was like, what? Of course I do.
Yeah.
Marvel, is this a joke? Like, is this one of my cousins like playing a prank on me, you know, like all big time
Yeah.
writer, you know? And it was not a joke. And so they showed me what they had on America. And I was like, okay, let's do this. And then what I know of comics, I don't know if y'all have read the Love and Rockets series by the Hernandez brothers. They are like madcap, zany, like punk rock, Chicanx stories, right? Where sometimes the stories connect, sometimes they don't, but sometimes they're in space, sometimes they're in Texas. Like, it is bananas and like beautiful.
It's so good.
And so like that was the energy. I ran with America with that energy. Put her in college. And then when I was thinking America through, there were parts where I was like, okay, if she's gonna go to college, what kind of college is she gonna go to? And then I realized that like, there is no college created for me. There's no colleges like being like, oh, you know who we should really censor here? Like queer Puerto Ricans. Especially like the chubby ones, you know, we should censor that. There's like no, you know, and that's fine, right? Like they can't make a college for all of us, but I was like, what if there was a college though, that at the center had like America and her identities, and interests and queerness and indigenous rights and all of these things, right, at the forefront.
Yeah.
And so I played around there, and I had, let's see, do we have a picture of that? Let's see what I got here. I'm trying to skip ahead. Anyway, if you guys can get me to the picture of Storm, that would be great.
Aw.
Oh yeah, that's me. Hi,
Aw.
hi. I forgot I had this whole presentation for y'all. This is my book, Juliet Takes a Breath.
This is the
yeah,
the
this
Penguin
is the
teen version, right?
this is the graphic novel version. Hold on, we're gonna get to America. I'm gonna go fast. There we go. There she is. And so we had America go to like Sonia Sotomayor University.
That is
Yeah,
awesome.
because listen, when I was like the broke lesbian cousin writing her book in the basement, you know, like I had no hope, y'all. I was like, this is bad. I read Sonia Sotomayor's book. I borrowed it from the Bronx Library Center. And as I was reading her book, I realized like, one, she grew up like around the corner from my parents. She was also a Puerto Rican diaspora woman. She is diabetic, so I also have asthma. So it was like also there were these parts of her story where her health impacted how she was able to navigate the world. And you know, the Bronx has one of the highest has the highest asthma rates in the country. And so I felt inspired by her that if she could have you know, those issues and still find her way and focus and become like the first Supreme Court judge to be nominated by Obama, who was Puerto Rican woman, all those things, that like maybe I was gonna be okay.
Right.
You know, maybe I was gonna survive this.
Yeah.
Um,
And you heard
so-
from her, right?
Yeah. Yes, she wrote to me that the first couple of episodes, issues of America, her staff is like younger, right? They're like younger than millennials, and they were reading the comics, and they gave one to her, and so she wrote me a letter being like, "I am so proud of the work that you're doing." It's not working, the clicker. It's fine. She was like, so she wrote me this letter, and I was just like, oh my gosh.
That was awesome.
It was a huge moment, you know, because I don't know about, like, listen, for me, growing up in the Bronx, even with all the encouragement in the world and a really good family that loved me and so much, like, privilege in certain ways, there were parts of life that felt out of reach. Like, I never imagined I could be a writer.
Yeah.
I never imagined that someone like Sonia Sotomayor could, like, even know who I was, you know. I just felt so small.
Yeah.
And so writing America, writing for Marvel, reinforced the idea that, like, no, you were, like, never small,
Yeah.
right? Like, none of us are.
Right.
None of us are. There's always so much magic, and, like, there's always so much goodness in this life. And you get to turn around and you're writing Marvel Comics.
And I love that you say that, though, because I think a lot of us do who come from, like, first generation, who come from immigrant families. And it might be a universal experience, too, where you feel like, I can't see this path for me because I don't know, no one else has done it.
Thank you.
So what would you say to someone who is trying to be the first in their family to create a path outside of what they could possibly even imagine? I know that's a tough question, so I'm basically asking, how did you do it? You know?
Well, listen, I mean, speaking of things that, like, you can't even imagine, I felt like that was, like, the magic of America, right? Like, that we were doing things that I had never imagined before. Oh, yeah, leave that up. And this is, like, this image right
Love
here
this
behind
scene.
us is, like, such a powerful example of this. This is America being born by her two mothers, who are, like, celestial women of color. And, like, the power of their love and the power of the universe allowed them to manifest America Chavez.
Yeah.
And so what we did here, what I wanted to do was subvert the traditional birth narratives, right? Like, yes, of course, most of us came from, like, hey, a man and a woman ran into each other, made a baby, okay? And, like, you know, we see it in the movies, right? Like, the woman is pregnant, she's stuck in the elevator, oh my God, the baby's coming, you know? The husband is just like, what's happening? So there's this traditional birth narrative, which is beautiful and lovely and, like, you know, exists for a reason.
Yeah.
And then what it also does unintentionally is it says to, like, queer people and trans people, like, hey, but not you. You don't get to create a family. It's impossible for you to do that. So, like, you know, and family is also one of the first places we get thrown out of.
Yeah.
And so to me, I was like, let's really spin this. Let's make it so that, why wouldn't these celestial beings be able to create their own family, right?
Right.
And I view people, LGBTQ people, as divine, right? We are divine, and so we are able to create family. We choose our own families too, you know? And so this, like, outside of the imagination. I keep this framed on my wall to remind myself of, like, what is possible.
Yeah.
And I wanted to, like, also highlight their love. And so to anyone looking to start a new path, you've never done this before, you've never been an artist before, you're the first scientist in your family, like, do that thing.
Yeah.
And you are not alone. And you're probably not the first, because it wasn't until I came out that I realized and I learned about and did my homework on myself and my identities that there are other queer people, that there were Chicanx activists in the 50s battling against white gay bars because they didn't want to let the Mexican gays into the white gay bars. And so I'm like, oh my God, we have been doing this forever. So
Yeah.
I am not the first. There are others that came before me, and there will be others that come after me, and that is like the mindset that you can hold.
Right.
You're not alone. You will find those other footsteps. You will find that other work.
Yeah. And it makes me think about your podcast, which is amazing.
Yeah,
And
thanks.
so your podcast, Joy Uprising, you speak to people about how they prioritize joy.
Mhm.
So what was the decision about creating that podcast and asking people to reflect on how they prioritize joy? Because if I'm honest, this
Speaking
is
of
awesome
joy.
part. I know, speaking of joy, yeah, if I'm honest,
I
I've
don't mean
never
for that
thought
to
about
just pop up out of nowhere. I'm trying to get through these slides. And
I feel like,
all right, we'll just
there
leave
you
it here
go.
for a
Yeah, that
minute.
was
Let's talk
good.
about joy.
Yeah.
You know, listen, whatever people believe, I just got to say, like, it's hard for me to not be a little political, right? Because politics is like life, and
Yeah.
especially here, right? So in 2016, when like he who shall not be named became president, there was grief.
Yeah.
There was utter grief in the New York City subways. I would take the subway every day of my life. I swear, maybe 9/11 is the only day that comes close to what it felt like. Maybe not 9/11, right? 9/11 was really tough, and I don't mean to diminish that, but the day after the 2016 election, there was a sadness and a despair in New York City on the subway that I hadn't experienced in a long time.
Mm.
And then everywhere that I went, traveling to speak, doing writing workshops, like at work, working LGBTQ youth groups, there was this inescapable feeling of despair and distrust. Like, was it you who did this to us? And now we have to be under the reign of this person for 4 years, right? And I just felt like everywhere I went, there were these pools of like misery. Everyone was talking about how scared they were, rightfully so. Everyone was talking about how frightened they were and angry. And there were reasons to be angry, right? There was so many riots. There were white men with tiki torches, like talking about you will not replace us, right? There was a president who actively belittled people with disabilities and said racist thing about Mexicans and all of these things, all of the things, right? And I was like, damn, how do we move through this? Like, how are we gonna survive this? And then I was like, well, I asked a group of people who had been commiserating with me for like an hour of the saddest, heart-wrenching things that were happening. And I was like, but what brought you joy today? And that like flipped the whole conversation.
Mm.
Everyone had a moment to like take a breath, right? Like like what you said when you opened this conversation today. And we got to talk about those things. And for some people, it was the simple act of like, well, my boyfriend made me dinner. Or like, I called my grandma today and she's still with us, right? I took a minute and I prayed.
Yeah.
These like small, beautiful things brought people joy.
Right.
And then the conversation that had all the ache and the angst and the aggression and the grief, it was like we had held that, and then when we talked about the joy, we were able to like move through it. And so that made me feel like, oh my gosh, you know what's would be really fun is to just like regularly talk to people about joy.
Yeah.
And so that's why I started the Joy Uprising podcast,
Yeah.
specifically to talk to queer and trans people of color about how we uphold joy
Yeah.
in our everyday lives, you know?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
would you say that you also, in the same way, center joy in your work? Or is that something you've kind of learned, as you were talking to people on your podcast?
I would say in the beginning of my writing career, I'm from New York. We're not
Yeah.
like, hey, I'm all about joy.
Yeah.
It's like, get out of my face. I'm trying to catch a train,
Right,
Yeah. So joy is definitely something that I have cultivated in my life. Because, listen, I mean, if you've been in the life long enough, whether it is because of your race or because of your sexual orientation, you have gone to enough funerals
Yeah.
and enough protests to last you a lifetime.
Yeah.
You have seen so much loss and experienced so much grief and rage that if you don't turn to joy, I felt like something was gonna like burn out in me forever. I've lost kids, like I've lost kids in my LGBTQ youth groups because they grew up in a society that told them something was wrong with them. And so like, when that happens, you have to be able to also lead those kids that came up in the program with them, right?
Yeah.
Who have had to like bury their peers. You got to be able to offer those kids something.
Right.
And that something is the communal joy.
Yeah.
That something is the like shared holding of space, the hugs, the plates of food, the so what if there's 20 of us here, one more fits,
Right.
and that's you, and you are enough, and you are loved. So like joy is that salve, that balm, and it's also that energy that allows us to like keep going for the next time,
Yeah. Yeah, and it makes me think about how a lot of people think about queer stories and queer narratives, like you were saying, that there's just trauma in them, right?
Yeah.
But I feel like your work balances both. You don't shy away from like talking about that. And then you also bring in, Juliet's silly, America's like.
Oh my God, wait, yeah, let's go back to that America one where she's on the cloud.
Yeah, so.
If I can go back. There we go.
And I love that about your work. And so,
Yeah.
Is that something you really always lean into?
Yeah, don't we have to, right?
Yeah.
Like, people love to profit off of the pain of black people. People love to profit off of the pain of immigrants. They love a horrible story, right?
Yeah.
They love to share videos about people's last moments on this earth. But I don't have to traffic in that.
Yeah.
We don't have to do that. I think there are more creators across race, ethnicity, disability that are saying, no, you can't just have that part. Like, I am a multitude. I am joy incarnate. I am happiness. I am possibility. And not because I meet your standards, but because I rise above my own,
Right. Yeah. And so what are some of the ways that like help you root yourself when you're creating to lean into that? Because I'm sure you have bad days too, and those probably affect your creative process, I'm assuming.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've gotten very honest. I'm like, I just turned 40, right? And so, so like, I just don't have time to pretend that I'm not tired. Like, the pandemic hit and it was horrifying, right? Those first couple of months, I mean, I don't care where you're at right now, in the pandemic, but like in that beginning, it was horrifying, right? And it took the ability to write from me.
Yeah.
My next book, Rapture, was due in 2020.
Wow.
And it was just like, I reached out to my editors at Penguin. I reached out to my agent at New Leaf, Joe Volpe. And I was like, I can't do this. Like, I'm having panic attacks. Like, I can't sleep. And then I was in California, so I couldn't breathe because there was smoke from the fires. And like, all of these things, right? And my editors and my author and my agent were like, just take the break. Like, we are all in a traumatized state. So in that moment, I just did what I could to make it through the next day, as we all did,
Right.
And so when the bad things happen, I share them. And even recently, right, I had a baby 9 months ago, right? So, yeah, I birthed a whole human, right? And I've been experiencing some like postpartum sadness. And the second round draft of edits for Rapture, I turned in I finally wrote a draft.
Yeah.
I finally got through that part. I wrote the draft, and then the second version was due last week. And I was like, hey, I have pieces of it. I'm ready. But I've also just been like washed up in this sadness that I can't explain. Can we like push the call for another 2 weeks? And again, I have a wonderful team who was like, yes, thank you for telling me. I too experienced postpartum, la 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 la. Any help that you need? Here's a group that I went to.
Wow.
And so I just don't have time to participate and like work that doesn't allow for my humanity and my lived experience, you know?
Yeah, and then not like communicating that too, which I think is like there's shame around that, right?
Sure.
And
Yes.
you know, I think that's the difficult part too.
And it's a privilege, right? Because like I have the type of schedule now where I make my own hours. But when I was working on the clock in my 20s, there was a lot of jobs that would have been like, oh, you feel sad? You could get a new job. You know what I mean? Like, so in those times back then when I had nothing and yet I was working 100-hour weeks, there was less flexibility. And still, there were moments where I walked away from jobs where I was like, oh, I can't go to a funeral?
Right.
Oh, then I don't need to go to this job. Like, I will figure it out. I will reach out to my community. I will find a couch. I will find a place, you know, so.
And I mean, those are like setting up massive boundaries because that's what it is, right? It's telling yourself like this is not something I can do. And so I listened to the first episode, which is your episode with your therapist.
Oh, yeah, that's the fun stuff, y'all. I talked to my therapist, episode 1.
That was wild. It's so good. So can you tell us a little bit about that and your journey to setting up personal boundaries, which I think, you know, bring you that joy.
Oh, my God. So the first episode of the Joy Uprising podcast, I talked to my therapist because it was working with mental health professionals, right? Listen, my life, so much has happened, and I think at one point, my best friend died. I was getting out of an abusive relationship, and I had been also like traumatized by my dad's family, right? So all of these major things crashed into each other at one point, and I just had no hope. I didn't want to be here anymore, and so I turned to therapy, and it like had literally saved my life. And I'm talking like free New York City therapy that I had to wait like almost 6 months for, that cost me like $8 for the session because they review your income to see if you can get care kind of therapy, okay? And even that therapy helped save my life. And I remember when I was talking to certain trusted family members, some of them were like, you go to therapy? But like, you were never in a war. What do you need to go to therapy for? Yeah.
They want it to be extreme.
It has to be like you got, you know, it had to be that if I hadn't gone to like, you know, Vietnam or something like that I was not allowed to seek mental health care. And so the reason I open up with Joy Uprising is to like remove that stigma, and talk to her about how in her practice, she was noticing that so many other queer and trans people of color were like seeking joy and trying to rally for it as like a life-saving tool. And so, yeah.
And in terms of it being a tool, like what's been the biggest way that you feel like you use it as a tool yourself?
Just building it and sharing it with other people. Like that's part of the podcast, the purpose of it. Just like with America, right? Just like with America, just like with Juliet, it's like living testimony. To be able to say like, this wild adventure, you get to go on it too. The Reverend Kelly Brown Douglas, when me and her talk about joy, she talks about how the divine did not create any binaries. And so as like trans and gender nonconforming people, it is our divinity that truly reflects the universe, right? Because the universe is full of cosmos, which are full of planets, which are full of all of these things bursting and forming and that don't follow a set pattern, a set structure. So why would we put that on ourselves here and say that this is of God, right? And to me, that is like radical joy.
Right.
That is like a testimony that should be documented forever so that when you do not have that joy, it is here, right here for you. In America too, right? Like Latina women, black women, we are expected to carry so much, to do so much work, to run families, to run neighborhoods, to end racism and poverty. Like, you know, there's a lot of pressure. And so it was important for me to have a superhero, right? Like our mothers and our grandmothers and our tias and our cousins to just rest and hang out and catch some sun for a minute, to offer that model.
Yeah. And you speak to a lot of different people. Like you have like a tarot card reader, you have your therapist, you have Maria Hinojosa.
Yeah, Maria
badass
Hinojosa.
Journalist, Latina journalist. And What have been some of the takeaways from all those conversations you've had that really taught you something different about joy?
Ah.
Is that gonna be a hard question?
No, that's such a good question. It's one of those things that everyone can participate in and has access to. And joy is something that, like, I mean, when I spoke to Maria Hinojosa, she was talking to me about the joy that she found while interviewing people in, like, immigrant detention centers.
I remember that. Yeah.
And a place where you would imagine there would be absolutely no joy, right? And so she's talking to mothers, and how could they even have that there, you know? And Maria was saying that, like, it is this human spirit. It is me in connection with this one person for these few minutes. And as we're holding hands, we are building that joy, right?
Yeah.
And so I have just learned that it is this gift that you can offer to anyone at any time. And that can be offered to you, and that we all deserve it.
Wow.
You know, we all deserve to be connected in this way.
That's so powerful.
And it's fun, right? Like one of the
Yeah.
episodes, we talked to my girlfriend, right? So it's like me and my partner, two queer Latinas. She runs the Radical Monarchs. I am this writer person. And so it, like, we get to like have this goofy, gooey, lovey,
Yeah.
beautiful conversation. And I'm like, man, if I grew up, I didn't I didn't even know you could like really have a beautiful partnership with another woman growing up. I just thought like you'd be in some dark, evil place, like having sad lesbian conversations, you know what I mean? Like
You would be dying, remember?
yeah, you wouldn't even make it, you
Right,
know?
like-
And so like we get to have fun, and no one can
Yeah.
take that from us, you know? They can't take, they want to, but they can't, you know?
Right. So I know we're actually winding down on time, and we're gonna
can't
flip
believe
to
it.
audience questions in a little bit. But I do want to ask you. We talked about books
Books.
and books that bring you queer books that bring you joy.
Yes.
So I was wondering if you could talk about some of them before we jump into audience questions.
Sure. If you have not read The Stars and the Blackness Between Them by Junauda Petrus, it is breathtaking.
So good.
She is a queer black activist from Minneapolis. And she has just written this testament to like black love. And somehow, and between two young girls, right? One is from Brooklyn, and I think the other one,
Minneapolis.
I
No?
forget where they're from. I think one is from like Haiti, and the other
Oh
one
no,
is
you're
from
right. You're right.
from Brooklyn.
Trinidad or?
Trinidad, yes,
Yeah.
Trinidad. Thank you. But it also somehow weaves in the story of like what it's like to be aware of the story of a black man who's been wrongfully incarcerated, right, as a young black girl, how she's relating to this story and how she's also able to fall in love. But the language is like a symphony. It is poetic and breathtaking. So I love that book. I also love, there's a comic by Misty Franklin called Bingo Love. And, and Bingo Love is the story of these two young girls that fall in love in Baptist church in like the 1940s or 50s and get pulled apart. And then as older women, they re-meet at that same church. And it's just like, just rip me open and like take my heart, you know what I mean? And then, what is it? Aristotle and Dante discover the secrets of the universe.
Yeah.
Like, you know, there's this idea that like Latino boys are just these tough troublemakers
Yeah.
that are doing nothing all day but like trying to harass women and like steal something.
Right.
These are the stereotypes. These are the images that are pushed about young Latino boys. You know, like I grew up also in the Bronx where they enacted this policy called Stop and Frisk. Mayor Bloomberg was like, that was like, his girlfriend was the stop and frisk policy. That's how much he loved it, right? And there was this policy of just literally yanking black and brown men off the street from whatever they were doing, throwing them up against walls, throwing them in jail, taking everything in their pockets. Like, I would literally be on the bus to the dang library. Police would storm the bus and pull the young men off and like cuff them on the sidewalk. So this is what's happening all the time. And so with Aristotle and Dante, you get a narrative of young boys with interests that love like art and history and like that are curious about the world and about each other, and you know, about like driving a truck and going on an adventure, right? Like, it's this soft sweetness of them that we don't get. And so it's just such a beautiful love story. I give that book, at one point I was just giving that book to everyone. Like, here, you must read this.
Yeah, I actually recently read it, and I was like, this is what my like young queer heart needed. Like, it was just so soft and
Yeah, and
so
the parents
tender.
too, even if you're not
Yeah, the
queer, right?
tender, yeah.
Like the parents in that book, they're like surprised.
I know.
One of them is like surprised that his son is gay, but he's also just like, hey, give me a minute and
Yeah.
I'm gonna get there. And I
Yeah.
support you and I love you, you know? And I think that's just the message that across the board, people deserve to have, experience.
Whew. That was so good.
Yeah.
I love that book.
Like the list?
Yeah. So do you guys, anybody, we have questions, right? Anybody have questions? Don't be shy. We're all family here. Okay. We have one over here.
Thank you. Hey, I'm Amy.
Hi, Amy.
It's really good to hear you both talk. So, question about joy. I remember reading a book that was a free book. It was left on a bench somewhere. Krista Tippett, and she talks about the challenges of a journalist of making good and joy as sexy as evil and dark. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, and could there be a shift in the culture? Like, how is lightness gonna battle the sexiness of darkness?
I love that question.
You know, I have no idea. I don't know why people are so invested in violence and aggression,
Yeah.
right? Like, that is exhausting to me, and that is like something that is pumped to us at every turn. Like on the news media, they love speaking in these like aggressive tones, and you know, even during the 2016 election, it was all about grab them by the this and like build the wall. So you know, like to me, I just turn away from that. I think that as each person individually turns away from that and seeks softness and seeks tenderness, like that's the way forward. But I often find it hard to imagine some big cultural shift here where people aren't like lusting for violence. And it isn't the most like the violent movies that make the most money, right? Like, but there is hope, right? There is hope. And I feel like there's a younger generation and then there's an older generation of our elders. And I feel like lately I've been seeing more conversations of them meeting each other, where older queer folks are talking to younger queer folks and saying, hey, like, you're not alone. You've been here before. Here is like a book from Audre Lorde. Here is a comic book. Like, what are you doing? Let's uplift that thing that you're doing. Let's support you. I feel like there's more of that energy being like popping up in like college campuses and high schools. I did a conversation with like an elder community group, and they were like so excited about like being on TikTok and being able to talk to young people about like what it was like for them, you know? And so that big cultural shift, man, like I feel like let them have it.
Yeah.
Because my life, my reality, again, is always like the smaller communities. It's always in people on an individual level. You know what I mean? You know, it also, in this country, like, where do we put our dollar? We got a movie like Love, Simon, where the two gay kids are in a rom-com. And it did pretty well. So that gives me hope for like the next movie, right? And the next show, and, you know,
Yeah.
poco a poco.
And I think about darkness being easy. You know, like you fall into it versus like choosing to be happy and to be grateful and to be joyful. Like for me, I would say that's harder,
Yeah.
you know? So,
And it comes with like a reckoning too, right? Like the reckoning that's happening here at this library with the Emmett Till installation. That is like a reckoning of a historical, like, utter moment of like grotesque violence. Inexcusable, like unforgivable, right? And folks could have just been like, well, that already happened. We don't have to talk about it. And they did for a long time. But then coming here, even me, I've known this story, unfortunately, for a long time. Being able to sit in that installation and take that story in and remember how many people's lives were affected. And to this day, folks are like, this story is important. We got to keep telling this story. Like, that's how we move forward. That's how we make other choices, you know? That's how we can look at violence and find that love and find that, like, reckoning.
Oh, yeah, we have a question right here. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Adrian Garcia. I actually met Lupita way back in the day. I'm part of this queer Latino book club here.
Cool.
It's called Los Bukis, and we read your book a few years ago. One thing that I really, really loved about it was just this theme of like how multiple things can be true, right, at once. And, you know, you get it when she meets, like, her, you know, the person who she's admired, you know, like, who she thought was going to be her mentor, like, the lessons that she learns from her, like, own cousin and stuff. And, you know, I was just curious as to, like, where, like, has that been, like, big in your world, too, and, like, in your experience? And how did you come up with, like, all these different moments to showcase it in the book?
I mean, yeah, Juliet is definitely based on my life experience. There have been so many folks that have just offered me wisdom and insight and, like, you know, we don't come fully formed. We don't live fully formed. We're constantly learning and evolving. And in Juliet, there's so much room for her to, even as a queer kid, be like, what does it mean to be transgender, right? What does it mean to be gender nonconforming? We don't just, it's not like you wake up and you're gay and you're like, I know every gay thing that has ever happened since the beginning of time with every term, and I know every pronoun, you know what I mean?
You
like
didn't
we
get the manual? I mean, it came straight to my mailbox. Okay.
Listen, you better send me that manual. And so, yeah, like, wait, I think I got a little mixed up. Oh, so then in my life, I wanted to reflect that it wasn't that you have to be this perfect person and that you have to ascribe to like this complete set of ideologies. I wanted it to be like, hey, there's room for all of us to be learners, to learn from each other. Like a professor at your college is going to share and teach you something, but that doesn't mean that thing is better than what your abuelita taught you. That knowledge is trumps her wisdom because it came from this institution and hers comes from like the campo, you know, the countryside or something like that, right? So it was, in my life, I have experienced that from so many folks at all different levels, and I wanted to offer that to Juliet too, and to remind kids like that wherever you're from, like the people that hang out in the corner on your neighborhood, like those are good ass people. They're hardworking people. They have stories, lived experiences, like, and we don't get to just dismiss folks because, oh, they're not like this official person or a politician or something like that, you know? And yeah, and that's my favorite. Like my favorite way to like learn is to be sitting at like somebody's kitchen, right? And being like fed and eating together and like, you know, holding that kind of space. And so in Juliet's book, I wanted to make sure that she had those experiences as well and not to like elevate one over the other. Yeah, thank you.
Question down here.
How you doing? My name's Isaac. I had one question, but before that, I came here with my partner who read your book, loved it, and one thing that I guess stood out to me being a newcomer is that prioritized joy of, you know, if I walk into a place, you know, I'm a threat or I'm wrong to this person, wrong to that person, how do I, you know, make myself happy, not like at least, but in spite of all that, to create my own joy and put that first. I really enjoyed that message from you. And secondly, I'm like a Marvel, DC Comics guy. I really enjoy that. And one question I have is when you're staring at that blank page, you know, working with the storyboard artist, and you can literally represent yourself in any way possible, and with the comics, like picture that in any way possible, like having the entire world and like the burden of representation, how did you narrow it down into, you know, like 20, 30 pages? What's that process like?
Listen, one, I want to say, when you walk into a room and I'm in that room, I am so happy that you have walked into the room. I do not at all feel threatened by you. In fact, I feel this incredible joy, and like I want to protect you. So like just know that it's not always that you walk into a room and I understand that thinking because I have felt that too, that when I walk into a room, automatically people don't want to be next to me, they don't want to know me, they're grossed out by me. But like know that I'm learning that that's not always the case, that sometimes when I do walk into a room, people see me and they're like, oh, like that, she looks like my cousin. And I love my cousin, or like, you know, that's my daughter, or like, hell yeah, another lesbian, you know what I mean? Like, so when you walk into a room, you are wanted, you are welcomed, you bring joy, people want to protect you. And then, you know, this is so funny. This T-shirt here is a comic that I created called BB Free. And when I was thinking about what I wanted it to look like, again, I wanted like a brown-skinned, chubby, joyful Puerto Rican girl. She's actually a Puerto Rican girl in the future. She's coming from the swamps, right? And a plague, this was before the pandemic, a plague has taken over the world and it ate greed. And so it killed like 80% of the population. And this comic is called BB Free. And when I was thinking about her, I was like, I want these bright, vivid, vibrant colors. I want this magic, this splendor, and I want her again like chubby and strong and brown-eyed and beautiful. And everyone in her world to like have the magic of real life kids. Like everyday kids look all sorts of different and all sorts of wonderful, and they love each other. And you know what's so funny too? That brings me back to like that question that you asked. It seems simple, but let me tell you, with my mom being a kindergarten teacher especially, never once did I go into that kindergarten classroom and the kids were having like a race war. Never one time. Never one time were the kids like treating, you know, they would play with each other and have issues because they were kids, but it was never like, I'm not going to be your friend because you're black. I'm not going to be your friend because you're this or that, you know, in my mother's classroom in the Bronx. So there's this like innocence, this beautifulness, this like love, right, that exists in its pure form. And so when I was staring at the blank page, that's what I wanted to convey with BB Free. And also politically at the time, there were all these protests in Puerto Rico, and there was this governor, Ricky Rogelio, who had gotten caught, you know, being horrible, right, like embezzling and all these things, but also he had a text thread with other Puerto Rican politicians on the island, and they were saying horrible things about Puerto Ricans. They were saying that they were dreaming of a day where they could sell off the island and have a Puerto Rico without Puerto Ricans. And so my wanting to do BB Free was like, you cannot erase us. You can't do that. Yeah. There's going to be Puerto Ricans in the future. If I write it and I believe it, then so it is, you know? And so that's what's on my mind. I'm just like, you can't. Get out of here. Like, what are you trying to do? Like, how could you even think that? How could you even be Puerto Rican? And whiteness and wealth has got you so far removed from your own people that you're looking to sell off the island. No, it's not going to happen. Not in my books. Not in my world.
You manifest reality.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm from New York as well.
Hey.
My name is Judea. I'm interested in the process of getting a literary agent. You hear when the person gets to be a writer, and you hear when the good thing happened, but you don't hear the intricacies that go into what it takes to get a literary agent, what it takes to write a book. You just hear these things, and I don't think it gives a good direct path to someone that it's happening to around them, and they can pick up that, oh, this is what's getting ready to happen. If we have more of that information, we can then better navigate the system. Like you said, when they called you, you thought it was some cousin
Playing a prank,
playing
yeah.
a prank on you, because no one ever sat you down and said, this is the process, this is what happens, and then after that, this is when you're going to recognize it, and then after that, this is what happens, like a contract or whatever. Or
Right.
Right. We've had a couple of writers here that said the same thing as you. Then they got there, but then this happened and that happened, but we don't get the intricacies. So if you could just talk a little bit about how after they made that call, what you had to go through, and then how you got your literary agent. Did you have to call them?
Sure.
What companies did you research or something
Right.
like that? Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. That's a great question. First, everybody has their own journey and path to this. For me, it started with community. I was just bursting with words. So I was a poet at first. So I was going to open mics. I was reading my poetry. I was joining workshops. And in those workshops, they were at like Hunter College or like Bronx Community College or at the library that would be run by like writers, aspiring writers. So I was just constantly looking out for those opportunities and taking them and then building connections with those people. And at the same time, I had that like hard-headed mentality where I was like, I don't care. I don't need no agent. The system isn't for me. So why am I going to try to get into the system? I'm never going to get published anyway. I'm just going to be like in my neighborhood when people are good at something, they give it to you on the subway. They give it to you on the street corner. So I was there giving my book like printed from my computer. Here, take this. So in building the community and in just putting myself out there, a lot of that energy came to me. When I first published Juliet, I indie published with a small company that was just gonna do print on demand. And I found them through a writer friend from a workshop that I took, And so I had to buy my own copies, print out my own books. I would literally be on the subway and be like, hey, no disrespect, this is all love. You look a little gay. Here is my book.
I would have loved that.
People would be like, yes, give me your book. Can I have one from my cousin? Like that is the hustle. And then my community started writing about me, right? Like Black feminist women were writing about me. Queer people were writing about me. Like indie Bronx bookstores were blogging about it. And that energy, right, that brought agents my way. Then Roxane Gay, I met her at a bookstore she was doing a reading. Roxane Gay is like incredible Black feminist author. I went to one of her readings. I hadn't published anything yet. And I was like, hey, oh my God, my name's Gabby. I love your work. I'm writing a book too, which I'm sure she hears like every day of her life,
Yeah.
And she was like, here's my email. If and when you publish that book, hit me up and let's see what can happen. And I took that very seriously. And when I finished Juliet, I was like, I finished Juliet. And she was like, cool, I can't do much right now. I'm stacked, send me a copy.
Yeah.
And I followed up with that. I sent her the copy. And then she tweeted about it months later. And that was like, pff, it blew everything open. And then as far as agents go, I had a couple of agents reach out to me, including my agent, Joe Volpe from New Leaf Literary. Feel free to be like, Gabby talked about you. I'm writing a book. Like, I'm telling you, that's a resource. The first two agents were like, hey, Gabby, yeah, we heard about your book, and, you should really reach out to us, and la, 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 la. And then when I called them, they're like, yeah, this is what we're thinking, and we want this from you, and we want this, and, like, then I never heard from them. Yeah. And again, I'm hard-headed from the Bronx. I'm like, I ain't chasing you. My mother taught me literally when I was 8 years old, do not run for the bus. Yeah. I had ran for the bus and fell, and she was like, no, do not run for these buses. There's another one coming, 5 minutes or less. And I kept that with me. So those agents that were going to be giving me an attitude, and they hadn't even signed me yet, I was like, I'm good. I'm going to make you look better than you're going to make me look.
Right.
And Joe Volpe called and was like, hey, one of my interns passed along Juliet. We loved it. I don't want anything from you, but I know this is a hard publishing industry. Let's get on a call. Any questions that you have, anything that you need, I want to help you get. And again, I will even introduce you to other agents.
Wow.
And I was like, that's the lady I want to work with. That's the lady who doesn't want nothing from me but to see me thrive. And so I've had a beautiful professional relationship with Joe and Volpe for the last like 6 or 7 years. And all that's a really long story to say, like, I found all of these resources through community. And through people like a woman like Joe Volpe, who runs her own publishing, who runs her own literary agency, knowing that like as a white lady, she can't just be publishing white ladies. She has to like go beyond and do better, and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anyway, so if you're an aspiring writer, get out into the community. Elizabeth Velasquez, who wrote When We Make It,
Yeah.
she's doing a workshop now, and there's a sliding scale. Clarabelle Ortega, who has the Witchlings on the New York Times bestseller list, is doing writing workshops on Twitch and Discord. Find your favorite writers, go to those workshops, come to the library. Like, the networks are more available to you than you imagined. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you. This was such a pleasure, and I want to thank you all for being here with us. And Gabby, this is so much fun.
I had a
Thank
blast.
you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.